Hi, I'm Jim Shore. I want to welcome you into my studio today. We're going to do a little bit of a project today, and it's something that anyone could do. And the reason I say that is because this is not like high art. This project, as you can see, it's right here in front of you. This is a kind of a primitive sort of folk art project. It's got that Americana look, and for any of you who like that kind of look, this is such an easy thing to do. Now, the subject that I've got here, something that I just free-handed in, and I did this example here the other night. It only took me just an hour or so to do start to finish, and you can do exactly the same thing if you follow this technique. And while this subject is, it's this size, pumpkins and apples and so forth, this kind of of trim, the motif that I've used here. But you can use your imagination and do anything. This can be quilt blocks down here. This can be, some sort of checkering up here, or different kinds of flowering, or some rose modeling and that sort of thing. This can be maybe a flower basket, or it can be a cornucopia. It can be large and small. You can use your imagination once you get this technique sort of down. So we're going to do start to finish. I'm going to show you everything that you need to get. Now, if you're used to doing craft projects and painting and that sort of thing, then you'll have most of this stuff already. If you don't, then you can go to either the big box stores or the your hobby shops or places, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, places like that, and get the craft style of acrylic paints. They're a little bit cheaper than what's designated as artist paints. So just, you'll get this in the craft section, and they're not very expensive. And the color palette that you need to get sort of varies depending on the project that you want. Most of these things, though, they use kind of earth tones and that sort of thing. So I'd suggest go through and get maybe an orange, a nice red, got to have a purple, obviously. Get a burnt umber, sap green of some sort, and it's, maybe this is cobalt blue. It's a really great blue. Ultramarine blue is good too. I also have black. Now I want to caution you about black. Black is, there's such a high contrast. If you use black, it almost makes a hole in your painting. So I never use black per se. I will use black as a darkening agent to darken up my red or my blue or the browns or what have you. If I want something that's black, I take ultramarine blue or a cobalt blue, mix it with alizarin crimson or some form of dark red like a burgundy, and put a little bit of burnt umber in it. You mix those things together, and it'll give you what you can use as a black. It's very dark, but it still has life. So that's what I experiment with that kind of stuff, and also you'll need some white. Picture that I've got back here is being supported by one of my pieces. You can feel free to use anything you want. But okay, so let's get started. Now here's what you need. You'll need something that you're going to be painting on. Now I've selected 140-pound watercolor paper. And once again, it's readily available at the craft shop. It's not very expensive. But you can use just about anything. You can use, if you have a piece of paneling, or even a piece of foam core, or a piece of MDF, or something like that. All it has to do is a flat surface. This is already ready to paint on, of course, because it's watercolor paper. You can prepare any kind of surface though by just simply putting a coat of white on it, or gesso if you have it, or something like that. So you'll have a nice white surface to paint against, just like this. Now, I've lined it off, and I've also mounted it to just a piece of cardboard. And once again, you can use plywood, you can use paneling, whatever you got. That gives it a little bit of rigidity, because we're going to actually mount this framework to this, and that's what's going to sort of give us our structural strength here, and you'll see that in a minute. And I've also lined it off with painter's tape. The size that we're doing here is a little bit larger than the example I've got here. This is the image on this is 7 by 10. That gives you a 9 by 12 outside. And I've lined it off here, and I've got enough of a margin here. I've got maybe an inch and a half or inch and 3/4, because the frame that I'm using, and this is one of the frame stock pieces, as you can see, it's what we'll use here, is about 2 inches. So I want to have plenty of surface to mount that to, and maybe a little bit of overhang, and that works. Now, the frame material, once again, this can be any kind of scrap you got around the house. This happened to be a piece of lath that I found out in the workshop, but it can be just about anything. You can get material that's similar to this at your home store, and you might have something laying around the house that'll work. I just mitered the edges, and that doesn't have to be perfect, because what we're going to do, you'll notice you got corner blocks here, and once again I just cut a few of these things out. They're just 2x2 blocks. That's going to cover the corners. So once we get this thing under construction like this, and your piece up there like so, then you're going to cover it with a block here, and it's going to be just right, but it's going to cover up all of the flaws and sins of maybe some imperfections as far as making it. This is nice and smooth. Doesn't have to be. It can be distressed or rough, because after all, this is an Americana kind of homespun, primitive type of folk art. And so a little bit of imperfections like that is kind of expected. In fact, it's almost desired when you're putting this stuff together. So that's the good thing about this kind of style, is that it's very forgiving, because you don't have to be a great painter or an experienced painter even. If you are, good. But if you're not, the type of imagery here, if it's a little bit out of whack or a little bit out of proportion, that's okay. It's folk art. It doesn't have to be precision like a portrait. So okay, let's get started. First off, to make it easy for you, I would recommend laying out whatever your image is you've decided on, whether it's a cornucopia or a basket or maybe it could be a cat, it could be a birdhouse, whatever you want to do. And use this. In this case, of course, it's pumpkin and apples, and so that's going to stick with that. Down here, I've chosen to make the bottom base of the painting checkerboard pattern, and then at the top, I have free-handed in some little floral stuff here, and I'll show you how easy that is in a minute. But we've got to get started by sort of base coating to begin with. And as you can see, I've started just free-handing some guidelines in here to sort of keep me focused on where everything's going to go. I've got the top here. I've got the bottom. I'm going to put a little bit of a separation line here. I'm going to use purple, but you can use anything you want to. And that's just it. The color combinations that I've got here, you don't have to necessarily stick to. You can use your imagination, or you can do whatever's going to suit your application in the house. And then the image itself. Okay, let's just sketch this in. We've got this pumpkin shape here, and the stem is going to come up like so. And we're going to have some separations like so, like this. Then we're going to have a couple of apples down here, and one in the background, and one sort of overlapping. And if you overlap things like this, it makes it a little bit more interesting. And use the most important part of the pencil. It's the eraser. Okay, we've got it just about the way we want it. We'll have a stem coming up here and stem coming up here, like so. And so right now, in a very short period of time, we've got a rough sketch of what the finished product is going to look like. Okay? So now let's recap. You've got your cardboard backing. You've mounted your paper, whatever you're going to you choose to paint onto your backing. You've lined it off with your painter's tape, so you've got the framed out area of where your image is going to go, and you've sketched it off. Okay, now we're ready to start painting. Now, I use paper plates a lot as palettes. You can get palette material, but you don't need it, particularly with watercolors and with acrylics. Now, the advantage of acrylics is that they dry very, very fast, but that's also a hindrance. So you have to sort of gauge your work so that you can work the paint before it gets dry and you make sure it's dry before you move on so that you don't have any bleeding and that sort of thing. If you're familiar with painting, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not familiar, you will learn that very quickly. So what we're going to do first off is just get started on some of this background, and we're going to lay it out very quickly. We've got a little bit of, this is like a burnt umber. It's, they call it different things. Oh, I might add, this is something important. When you go to the store and you're buying your paints, this stuff, some of these colors will stay on the shelf for some time. And it's very easy for these things to go bad, and they get kind of congealed and they're not usable. So I urge you, if you select, let's say this one, and you want to purchase it, right there in the store, you open it up and you take a look at it, and you do like this to make sure that it is fresh and usable. Otherwise, you'll get it home and you'll be very disappointed. Okay, so I've got some brown there. I've got, I'll take just maybe a little touch of black on the side here, and some white. This is, you'll use more white than anything else, so when you buy it, you get a big one like this. Your initial purchase on this is probably going to be maybe a little bit pricier than you want it to be, but keep in mind, this stuff goes for a long, long way. You can do many, many, many projects like this, and when you even it all out, this stuff is practically free. Okay, we've got a little bit of an ochre. Might add a little bit of that too. Okay, now the brush to lay this in with is this one. This is one of these big bristle brushes, and they're real inexpensive, and they're kind of cheap brushes. But they work real good on this, particularly laying down a wash over a large area so that you can get it all down before it dries. Okay, water container. Okay, just pick up some of this. Okay, that little bit of that, and then make it diluted like this. Okay. Okay, now what we're going to do, a little bit more of that. This is going to be the background. As you can see, this and this, you have to have something to paint against rather than just sheer white. And that's what we're putting together here. So very quickly, you just lay that in, lay it in up here, and then take a paper towel before it dries, bunch that up, and then just start patting it off, and you can see you start creating some visual texture, and that's exactly what we want. We're going to do this a lot over the course of this painting, and that's what will give you that old-fashioned look that we're going for. Okay, now typically you would sort of let this dry, but that's so thin it will dry very, very quickly. Keep this extra off here so it doesn't mess with us. Okay, now you can go immediately into starting to do your blocks. Okay, what I've got here is, it's kind of a really, really dark shade. It doesn't have to be. You can use blue, you can use burgundy, you can use anything you want to on here. I'm gonna switch up just a little bit and put some blue in here. That'll give us a little bit of color. Now, you remember we laid in here just very lightly our blocks. That kind of gives us a little bit of a guideline, but you don't have to be real precise with this. If it's a little bit off, that even makes it look a little better. So pick a brush that'll do the job. This one will do the job. These squares on this thing, this is 7 inches, and if your squares are roughly 5/8 of an inch, let's say, that'll give you 11 squares. Now the reason it's good to have 11 squares is because it's an odd number. If it's 5, 7, 9, 11, whatever, if it's an odd number, that means that your dark square will start over here, and it will also end over here. That helps visually frame out your picture rather than it being dark over here and light over here, which kind of throws the balance off a little bit. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of the blue and a little bit of the black there and a little bit of the brown, and it'll give me this little bit more blue. It'll give me this sort of a dark slate kind of color, and that's what I'm after for laying in these blocks. Now, so look at what you got there, and you're going to have a dark one here. So let's just start it in with this, and you'll take your, okay, you don't have to come all the way down, but go there, find your line again on the next one, and come down. On this one, find that and come down. Just knock it out real, just pretty quick. Keep your paint flowing. You can vary it just a little bit, make it a little bit interesting. The reason I'm doing this is because if you go too far, you will hit the bottom of your next square and it'll throw you off. So you do sort of like one side at a time, makes it a little bit easier. Okay, there we go. Now on that square there, see, what I'll do is I'll turn it the other way and then finish out the square this way. And like I say, it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, you're kind of shooting for sort of like almost controlled imperfection, if you catch my drift. That gives it that sort of slightly primitive folk art look. Okay, now we're ready for the next. A bit more blue there, a little bit of brown. You can mess around, do any kind of color you want, but as you can see, I've got a little bit of a blue hue going, but it's still dark enough to really make a good checkerboard. And you'll be pleased at how quickly this goes because you're not being real precise and there's not a lot of precision going. As you can see, there's a little streak of blue there. That kind of looks good. I mean, it breaks it up a little bit. It's not just solid color. I think that makes it a little bit more interesting. And we're going to do some glazing on this anyway. As you can see, this looks pretty clean compared to this down here. Well, we'll kind of muddy this up and scrub it around on a little bit before we're done here, and that'll give it that kind of old-fashioned, aged look, and that's what you want. See, that I just did that a couple nights ago. It took me about an hour, and it looks like it was done, 80 years ago, and that's what you want. And the nice thing about it is, see, you can do something like this, keep the subject going. The next one could be maybe, pears or a slice of watermelon or something, or just a little group of flower blossoms, and make a collection of them that you could put in a nice grouping on the wall, and it really, really looks good. Okay, I'll be done with this in just a second. There we go. One more row up here, and we'll be done. Then we'll be ready to put a little bit of some purple to it, which, for all of you who know me, know that I really like purple for a lot of different reasons. Most of my pieces that I do, and if you're familiar with the sculptural pieces I do, just about every one of them has some little hint of purple. I do that sort of pay homage to my grandmother. She loved purple, and she did the same thing in all of her work. If she was sewing on something, it would have at least one little bit of purple thread in it, because that was kind of her signature. And I've kind of adopted that myself, so I'm at a signing and I mentioned that, sure as the world, the people who are listening will pick out one of the few pieces that don't have purple in it. Okay. See how that works? And you can go back, touch around on everything. So we're making progress. And this is something actually that it's a lot of fun to do as a project with your kids. I was recently, or with your group of friends, over if you get together for coffee, we'll get together and break out the paints and make something. I was recently up in Pennsylvania visiting some dear friends of mine, Pete and Linda Sauvignier. They've been friends of mine for years. And in the little town that they live in, they have a small group of women that get together, and it's kind of, I think, an offshoot of the Red Hat thing that they used to do or whatever. But they get together and we did a little tie-dyeing or silk dyeing this with them, and that was a lot of fun. So this is the kind of project that they would be doing, and I urge you to get together with your friends, and it's a great way to pass the day and actually end up with something that you can decorate with, and it'll be part of your little family history for a long time to come. I've got a lot of stuff like that in the house that I've done with the kids, or I've done with Jan, or I've done. Okay. And it just it adds a personal touch to things that you just can't do by going out and getting it any other way. Okay, so there you go. See, it's a little bit off, it's a little bit crude, but that's fine because that's the way we want it to look. Okay. So now we're going to do something that will save us a little bit of trouble a little bit later on while we've got our paints going. We're going to start doing a little bit of base cutting because I'm not going to use this for a while, so I don't really need it. But I'm going to start putting some paint on the frames. And all we want is we want just to darken this. Okay, not down here because we want a glue space here. All we want to do is get some paint on here, because we're going to paint against that in just a little while. You'll see this kind of pattern looks a lot different, right? Well, you'll see it. It's an age-old technique that they used to use an awful long time ago, back in the colonial days, to make a very easy decoration, and it comes up with this kind of colonial, kind of Williamsburgy looking look, and that's what we're shooting for right now. Once again, there's no really wrong way of doing this. And even in the paint, you can, if you want this to be bluer, or if you want it to be more greens, or even some red, that's great. In fact, what I like to do is I like to get this paint put on here just as quick as I can, let it start drying, and then I'll come back at some point and just dab in some different colors and everything before I put the final glaze on it. You can even see that in here. See where I've got a little bit of reds in here and some different colors coming out in there? Well, that's just stuff that I sponge around on. A lot of times just picking it up out of my very professional palette here. Okay, let's make up some more. I'll get these things done real quick. Get that out of the way, and then they'll be drying, so that we'll have something to paint against going forward. There we go. Put this cobalt blue and this brown. And this happens to be these craft colors. They don't call colors the same way you do in, like you might say, legitimate artist colors. They won't say like Payne's Gray or Van Dyke Brown, or they'll have some other catchy little thing for it. But you can look at it and tell what kind of color you're looking at. You get a nice dark brown and a nice dark blue together, and it makes this really warm gray. You can tone it down with whites, and or beef it up with a little bit of your black. Oh, by the way, when you're selecting your black, I recommend getting what's called ivory black. There's lamp black or carbon black, and then there's this lamp black, ivory black. It's a little more transparent than the other blacks that are so opaque and so dense. It makes it a little bit more easy to use as far as, glazing, shading, shadowing, that kind of stuff. And it doesn't leave quite the hole in your canvas that the denser blacks do. So, okay. Now we'll put a little bit of something on this. We're gonna color these anyway, but this gives you something to paint against. So you're not dealing with just raw material. It's always kind of important. That's why we did what we did here on the paper. Come up with something it's going to change as you go along, but still you got something to deal with. And if you have a little bit of, unpainted area peeking through, at least they'll have some base coat on it. So it won't be just like paper or, the white background looking at you. Okay. At some point during the time, you can feel free to stop and wash up. It's kind of hard to do this without getting a little bit of paint on you, so that's probably a good thing to mention too. Be prepared to be messy. In other words, if you're working in the kitchen or whatnot, put down some craft paper or some butcher paper or something so that you don't do an oops and make the rest of the people, or in my case the whole family, mad at me for ruining something. Yeah, wear an apron or something that you don't mind getting paint on. I already have paint on just about everything I've got, so it really doesn't matter to me. I'm just looking out for you. Okay, so now we've got the frames here nicely base coated, and they are drying so that by the time we get around to finishing this thing, that'll be ready to do. That is very quick, and you'll see. All this stuff looks, the end product looks complicated, but as you can see, so far, it's a pretty simple process. Okay, now we're going to start laying in, well, let me put the purple line down first. That'll give us a baseline to put our details on. Okay. Shake them up, because the acrylic obviously has, it's an acrylic because that's what the medium is. The color itself is the same kind of pigment that colors anything, from house paint to artist paint. It's the dryer, or the whatever you want to call it, the medium. That's what determines whether or not it's acrylic or whether it's oil, whether it's watercolor. Watercolor uses gum arabic. Oil uses some type of alkyd or linseed or some other kind of oil. This uses as an acrylic, it's basically a plastic. Okay, let's see. Now I've got tons of brushes. You don't need tons of brushes. Pick out some good brushes like this. These are cheap. These are, you can get a whole bag of these for just a couple of bucks. Some of these are a little bit more expensive, but they don't have to be. You can go with the cheaper ones. Just get you a good liner brush, a couple of these flats like this, a ball end brush like this one right here, that's what they call that, and a few other little things. And you'll see you can make do with very few brushes. But I like brushes, so I got a whole bunch of them. Okay, this one here is called a fawn's foot. Got a little shape to it. You'll see. Okay, what I'm going to put this line on with, got to be, kind of careful with this. See, by now, most of our squares down there have already dried, so we're good. Okay. Now I laid in my line there, so I'm going to pull this across here and try to make a line that is fairly accurate. And now I can breathe. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty straight. Okay, notice I only did one side. That's so that I don't accidentally dip into the other and get a little bit too close to my my blocks that I want to keep. Just take your time. Once again, this doesn't have to be perfect. It's not like you're doing a portrait or some piece of photographic realism where you really have to be careful. See, that's good enough right there. See, nice straight line, pretty straight. Doesn't have to be real straight though, but I mean just straight enough to give you some sort of a visual separation between one feature and another. Use your imagination. You can go all over the place with this as long as you sort of stick to this kind of general technique that we're working up here. And if you want to, at this point, you can say, okay, I know where my top's going to go, so let me just lay in a little bit of something just to give me a dividing line between the top and the painting, and we'll flesh that in a little bit more later. So I've got a little bit of something, just something dark. Now, I've got a line kind of, sort of made on that too, so I will carefully pull this across. Okay. Now, I'm very good at making straight lines because I've done it for a long time. But something that I do that's kind of might help you, and you can try it, is when you're painting a straight line, don't look directly at where you're painting. If you look right ahead of where you're painting, so you pull the brush to where you're looking, you'll see that it's pretty easy to stay right on track. That's kind of what I do. Different people that do painting and that kind of stuff have different techniques, but that's one that works for me. You might want to try it. Okay, now, so, see, we're well underway. And all this looks pretty flat compared to that up there, but we're going to fix that in a little bit with doing some glazing that'll warm this thing up and it will make it look old. And then we can pop our frame on there. And in short order, we will be in the proud owners of a very nice piece of artwork. Let's see. Okay, we're going to do I'm going to throw this away because I'll probably use some more a little bit later. Set it aside. We're going to use a color here, appropriately enough, called, well, they call it spiced pumpkin. It's more like a burnt orange. You can take red and yellow and mix it together. It's orange, put a little bit of brown in it, and you'll get the same effect. And brown, of course, is red and green, so you go from there. All right, let's. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to solidly lay this this orange in here to give us, and we'll start modeling the shape of it in just a little bit. So we don't want to get too far up there in where our green is going to go, because save us having to deal with that. And then just kind of follow the gist of what you laid in there when you were doing your pencil sketch early on. I sort of like to follow where my strokes are going to go eventually. Gives me a little something to, paint against. Here we go. Now, when you get down here to the purple, you got to be kind of careful. You don't want to louse up something that you so carefully did. Okay, now see, when you have those little bit of white or light colors peeking through there, it's not so bad because you've already toned that down with some of your that early base coating. I've got an apple that's going to go in here, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of make a space for it. There we go. And remember, this is only paint. If you paint over something and you get it's out of whack, I painted over something, don't worry about it. Just wait till it dries and fix it, with some more purple or some more dark or what have you. So, always remember that. Everything is fixable. Even if you get something completely painted in and you say, I don't like that, well, you can paint over it. Paint over it. Even if you make mistakes, you can paint them away. And nobody will ever know. It's the advantage of working in your studio. You can explain that every stroke is divinely inspired. And you never make a mistake, but of course we all do. All right, so that's the base for our pumpkin. Okay. Now let's get some reds in here. Now I've got a couple of shades of red. I've got this stuff here, which is actually, this is one of my favorite colors that's in the red directions. It's alizarin crimson. And it's, as you can see, it's a beautiful color. Just delicious. I'll use that for some of the shading to shape these things. So I've got that there. And then I've got some of this good, it's just a true red. Use a little bit of that. And I'll use a little bit of this, darker, and use just a little bit of, this would be like, this says burnt umber. Some of these things aren't totally accurate. This would be more like the way it comes out, more like a Van Dyke brown, I think, maybe. You can judge. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'll pick a little bit smaller brush, maybe. This will work. And we'll paint these apples in. Now the one in the back, I'm going to make it just a little bit darker than the one in front. That'll keep my line honest. And once again, see, as you can see, we're going to come over top of this with a black background, or well, I say black, it's going to be a dark background. And one of the things that we'll end up doing is we'll go sort of back and forth between our darks and our lights. Because this is sort of where it becomes kind of fun in that you'll see that as you layer these things on here, and now what I'm doing right now is fairly dense, but a lot of the layering you do will be almost transparent. It'll be washes and glazes. That's a nice color, right? Okay, so that's one of our apples, and now I'll kind of clean that off, and I'll do the other apple with more of a pure red, and there we go. As you can see, my stroking technique is well, in this case, non-existent, because what I do, all I want to do is get the paint on there. That's the nice thing about this kind of painting. You can do it in one setting, or you can have several of them going all at the same time and jump around from one to another. That's kind of how I relax. When I take a break, to me, taking a break is just doing something different. People say, how do you get so much done? Well, just never stop doing stuff. Okay, now, while we're doing this, let's get the whole thing base coated. And the next thing is we'll use a green. This is well, they call it forest green. It's basically a really true green. And what I don't want it to be quite so green. So I've got some brown right next to it. You can go into this green with between an ochre. So put a little ochre right there. And your darks here, and make more of an earthy green. And that's about what we want right there. Fiddle around with this and play with these color combinations, and you'll see that it won't take you too long to get sort of the hang of where these colors will take you. Okay, now this is it looks pretty dark, and that's fine, because we will come back and we will put some highlights in it, and that will shape it up. And on this we want to sort of come around like that. Make a nice, beautiful curving sweep. Tighten that up just a little bit more. There. Okay. So, as you can see, we've got, in a very crude way, the painting pretty much on the run here, okay? Now, next thing we do, we're going to paint in the background here, and that'll change the complexion of this altogether, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. What I want to do is I want to get just something that's going to give me the appearance of kind of a black almost. So I'm going to actually use a little bit of black. So like I said, I'd usually temper that with something else. I can even pull in a little bit of the red that I have over here and make an interesting background. There you go. See that now? See, that's real dark and it's almost a black, but it's not black. It's got some life to it, in that I've pulled in this alizarin crimson along with this burnt umber, Van Dyke brown, whatever you use, and a little bit of black, and it makes a nice, dark, dense color that still has some life to it. And you'll see as you start putting it down how it's really velvety, and it's got it really looks good. Once again, stroking technique, non-existent. You just get the paint on there any direction you want. Sometimes it matters, but in this case it doesn't. And don't worry about having some build up in the form of like ridges or something like that with your paint on this kind of stuff, because that's good. When you go to glazing it, it'll pick up those little ridges, and once again deposit some dark color against light or light against dark, and it'll give it some interest. Now, probably if I was painting all myself, I'd slow down and maybe be a little bit more, slightly more precise, you know, but for the sake of, you know, our time management here. But you can see everything we've done so far has been, you know, been pretty darn quick. And if you're like me, where you're doing this while you've got maybe something on the stove, or maybe you've got some laundry going or something like that, you can sort of do a little of this and do a little of that, or go out and mow the lawn, or take a nap, or whatever you want to do in between, because it's just one of those kind of projects. And if you're doing a grouping of them, you can have a whole bunch of them going at one time, which I frequently do. I'm going to use a little bit smaller brush on this, maybe. So I get in there. Okay. Make sure you get all your spots. Okay. There we go. All right, here's what we got. Now we're kind of base coated in here, and we've got all of this going. Now, before we start modeling this, I'm just going to go ahead and lay these, this little bit of a flower thing going in up here. That'll take care of that, and then we can concentrate on this down here. Then the rest of it will be a little bit farther down the road. We'll do some glazing that'll be kind of antique-y, and it'll be pretty. Okay, now, to lay this in, I'm going to use some a little bit different colors, brighten it up just a little bit. This is, well, it says it's turquoise. We'll see. Yep, sure enough. Okay. We want that, and we want to darken it up a little bit, so we'll bring some of that over. Okay. I'm going to do the vein work I'm going to do with that color. Now, this is a little tricky right now because I've got wet paint that I'm going to be painting around, so I got to be conscious of that. So don't drag your sleeves through it or anything. Okay, I've got a liner brush. You don't have to use something like this. You can actually use a thicker brush like this if you're real careful, because it will go down to a nice thin point. But just for this vein work, that's what I'm going to use. Okay. Now, I'll sort of go by what I've got here, and I will start out with a little bit of something there. That's that one. And I'll come, whoops. Come up here like this. Like that. And I'll come here like this. That. And then maybe like that. Okay, to get that, great, huh? Okay, now we'll lay in those petals there. Once again, that's it's one of those things that's kind of up to you as to what kind of technique you want to use here. This is kind of the easy way to do it. You just make a mark, and then you come over and you make another mark. And then you make another mark, and then you make another mark, and then you make another mark, you make another mark, You make another mark. Fatten that one up just a little bit. Okay, that's what you got there, see? Now, then you take a brush, I've got one, something like this. See that end there? Okay. Dip it in one of your colors. In this case, I'm dipping it in this kind of orange, and just put a dot right in the middle. Bingo. Done. Okay, I'll do that. You know, we can take a little break, and I'll lay these flowers in. When we come back, we'll be ready to start shaping this stuff up and glazing it, and you'll see how this finishes up. Then we'll attack that frame project, and in just a few more sessions, and we'll have a piece of artwork hanging on the wall. So I'll be back in just a minute.
Go.
Hi there. Okay, we're back. I hope you did like I did. Maybe took a little break, had a cup of coffee in a Jim Shore cup. Okay. Now, while we were having the little break, I took the liberty of adding just a tiny bit of color to some of our frame elements here. I used some red, and I'm waiting for that to dry before we continue with the frame. That'll be the last thing we'll do. In the meantime, our painting looks like this. Yours should look, or when you get to this point, yours will look just like this if you follow the instructions. Now, what we're going to start doing now is we're going to start shaping these things in a very, very easy and simple way. While we were gone, I cleaned my brushes meticulously. I always do. Don't leave them in the water too long. Clean them out. Make sure they're nice and clean. Shape them. Allow them to dry. If you take good care of your brushes, they'll last you for an awful long time. Okay, now I'm going to do some shaping on this pumpkin. And what we want to do is we want to get the idea that it's got these ridges in it, and we're going to do that by just taking some of our orange, a little bit of brown, a little bit of this, and darken it up just a little bit to where we have some dark colors like this. And we'll start, let's say we want a ridge that goes down this way. And we want another one that goes down here. And maybe we want one that goes over here. And then we'll have something over here. Okay. So, get that laid in like that, and then start sort of, once it's like that, kind of dry your brush off just a little bit. And then just kind of start working this around like this so that you eliminate some of those dark edges and start, creating the shapes that you want. Just like that. See? Simple. If you just sort of, scuff it around like that, and you can see that the shape of the pumpkin is starting to emerge. And you can spend a little bit of time, see how that's beginning to look like it's actually got some shape to it? Okay, let's go back and get just a little bit darker. Use our browns, a little bit of, I put a little bit of the alizarin crimson over there on that, and then the orange that's the base of the pumpkin. Now let's come back in here and get even darker. Okay, now we start sort of pushing that color around. There's this sort of scrubbing motion. There we go. Okay, there. Now, get a little bit of white, a little bit of the orange, and we're going to just do a little bit of highlighting on this. Okay, as you can see, I'm just working in and out, getting this stuff moving around. Okay, then I go back with just a little bit of something that's just a little bit brighter. Almost white. There. We'll leave that alone for a while. Just a little bit over here. And then what we'll do, give ourselves just a little bit of a kind of a glow. A little bit of reflective light on the bottom there. Let's work that just a little bit differently. There we go. Okay, so our pumpkin has taken shape. Now we'll do basically the same thing with the apples, and we'll get our reds going. A little bit of the brown. Okay, and then okay. just a little bit of a dimple here where our stem's going to go. Then we'll do the same thing as far as the highlighting is concerned. See, our apples are taking shape. See? So, once again, there's not really a right way and a wrong way. It's just whatever, sort of piques your imagination and your fancy here. I like a little bit of backlighting on things. So what I'm going to do, shoot. Did I mention that I hate packaging? Okay, put a little bit of that out there. And just to make a little bit of backlighting here, we'll take a little bit of this and make kind of a nice warm color. Tiny bit of white. The white makes it dense enough so that you get away from the transparency of it. Okay, see what that does for us? Gives it that shape. You got a little bit of glow happening there. A little bit of maybe on this, on our pumpkin. There we go. All right. Do a little bit of highlighting on the stem, and it's sticking up there sort of minding its own business, and we will do just a little bit of line work or just a little bit of highlight work on it just to give it a little bit of shape. There we go. Okay, now for all practical purposes, as soon as we lay in the stems for the apples, we'll go ahead and make them fairly dark. Okay, here we go. See that? Same thing over here. There we go. Okay, we're just about to the point now where we can start glazing this thing up and maybe putting a little bit of antiquing on it, and for all intents, we'll have a pretty good paint. Now it's a little bit different than that one, and they're all a little bit different, as you can see. But the gist of it is that at the end of the day, you'll have a very nice piece of folk art, and we're almost done. Now, I want to take just another little break, and because when you do the glazing, You want everything to be really, really dry so you don't pull any of your colors out of here. And sometimes you'll have little thick spots, you know, and like for instance, some thickness on these stems and so forth. A little bit of highlights, a little bit thick. When you put your glazing on there, you don't want to pull that color out and make streaking in it that you have to fix. So the thing about it is at this point, take a little break, let it dry completely, and when we come back, we'll put the finishing touches on it, spatter it a little bit, and the painting itself will be done. Hi everyone, welcome back. Now the next step that we're going to do here is really the final step. That's what finishes this up. And if you've gone along with me, or when you start your project and you go back and you start looking at this stuff again, at this point you'll have something that'll resemble this. And once again I said you can use your imagination on your coloration or your choice of your flowers, or whatever. But I would urge you that on your first go around, if you're not familiar with painting styles and so forth, stay pretty close to what I've done here, so you can see that your finished product will look very similar to what I've done here. So I don't know exactly how much time we've got in this, but it's not much. It's still before lunch here. So okay, now this next part of it is what really gives it the antique look and this aged look, and really brings this thing together. And this is the glazing and spattering and so forth, and I'll show you what I'm doing here. Okay. Let me get my brushes together here. Yeah, this part of it is easy to do, but this is probably, on this styling, maybe the most important part. Okay, now we're going to do several different things. We're going to do a little bit of spattering, and what we're going to do here is we're going to get a little bit of water in our brush, and we're going to go up here and just pick up a little bit of browns. We'll make it a little bit sort of soupy. So we got a little bit of that going. And we're going to do like this. Okay? So what we want to do is just flick out in there just a little bit. So we got a little bit of some spotting in there. If we get too much, no problem. Just dab it off. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Now, what you see here at this point is a little bit of spots, a little bit of spattering, and that adds to the sort of aged feeling of what we got here. A little bit more there. Okay. Now, typically you would let this dry. In fact, this needs to be very dry. So let's take once again just a little bit of a break. Only take a few minutes for this light stuff to dry, but I don't want to rush it, because if you rush it, then you can wipe out what the effect that you've got here. So let's take just a couple minutes breaks. We'll be back in just a few minutes, and then we'll glaze this thing and we'll be done. Okay, that didn't take long. It only took a few minutes. Just want to make sure that it's nice and dry. So you want to rub your hand over it and everything, and if everything's staying put and it's all good, then you're ready to go to the next step, and that is to do a little bit of a glaze. This serves as kind of an antiquing, and what we'll use some browns and maybe just a hint initially of a little bit of blue. So we've got some blue over here, but we want this to be real runny. So we want to add a lot of water. And you can use this big brush, or you can use a little bit smaller brush. At this point it doesn't matter, because you can see what's going to happen here, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start dabbing a little bit on this, just to get a little bit of color in it, okay? And I will bit with my paper towel just to, okay. That breaks it up just a little bit and gives it a little bit of color. Now we'll do the same thing, and what we'll do, we'll use a little bit heavier browns. See, you've got all this stuff on your palette already. And you can see on here how it looks. It's got this kind of a distressed look. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now, so what you do is you start sort of working it over like that. Okay, you got kind of on there like that. Then you take your brush while that's still kind of wet. Clean your brush out. And you kind of work it to the outside like this. Okay, now, while that is still a little bit wet, you take just a little bit warmer color. In this case, we'll use a little bit of that type of brown, a little bit of red. And lots of water. And we'll work some of that in there. You can take a little bit of orange, work a little bit of that in there. Okay? So you work it on there like that, and then you kind of work it off. Okay? And you work that around until you get the aged effect that you want. So I'm doing this. Okay. So that, my friends, when you get it to this point, and you can work this for as long as you want. I think that we're, for the most part, I think that my painting here is just about the way I want it. So now, to remove this, our painter's tape. That's pretty more aggressive than I like it to be. Okay. This is one of my favorite parts because when you pull this off of here, then it frames it out and it's a nice clean edge. And there you go. See? Now that's the finished piece, and it's got that aged look, it's got that antique look, and it looks just super. Now, the last little bit to finish this project up, of course, get it framed. And we're going to do that just lickety-split here. What I've got here, and I've showed you that a little bit earlier, is these pieces of wood that are just, sort of crudely painted with this darkened stuff here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a technique that they that they've done for years and years, way back, put that aside, and it's this wavy pattern here. They used to do it on frames, they do it on furniture, they do it on doors, and they would do it on ceramics. And it was a favorite styling of the colonial artists in the early days of the country. And what you do, you put in this ochre color like this, and you apply it very generously, and you use this. This is the magic thing that makes this pattern. And what this is, it's considered a comb, but what it is just a piece of cardboard that I have cut with scissors, or you can use an X-Acto knife if you're very careful. And you make these little notches like this, okay? And the little notches are what's actually going to make our, our patterning here, and you'll see in just a minute. See that right there? Can you see that? The way that looks, that's just notches. Maybe I'll show you. See? Notches cut in there. So what we'll do is we will fairly generously give ourselves a coat of ochre real quickly like this. Then we will immediately take this and we will do this. And that's what you come up with. See? See that? Now we'll set that aside. Now this card's a little bit darker, but we'll see. We'll fix that in just a minute too. And we'll do that very thing to all of our pieces. You just put it on there just pretty good, pretty quick. And before it has a chance to know what's going on, you take your card and you, once again, make our pattern, our design like this. See? There we go. See how that looks? Set that aside. I hope you can appreciate how quick this goes. I mean, it's so super simple. Once again, got paint on there. And it, like I said before, I've said it so many times, none of this has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, anything that is precise or anything like that, because, it's folk art. And that's just the nature of folk art. And we got the last one. There we go. Okay, now, while I set this aside to dry, because the next thing that you do to that, it's got to be absolutely thoroughly bone dry, which doesn't take very long at all. And if you're a little impatient, actually you can use a hair dryer if you're careful and speed the drying process a little bit. But while that's happening, I'm going to do what I did on this one and put a little bit of decoration on these corner blocks that I've made up. And I'm going to paint a very simple, well, those are green, maybe this time I'll use blue. I've got some blue here. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to paint a very simple star pattern on this. The way I'm going to do that is There, see how simple that is? Nothing to it. So we'll put that aside, do another one. And once again, these can be hearts, it can be, you know, actually you can just leave it as regular squares if you want to, depending on what you're comfortable with. And it can be kind of crude like this is shaping it to be. There we go. See? And you want them sort of, I mean, they're hand done, okay? This is a handmade project, so you want it to look handmade. And in truth, early on, the people that did folk art that we love so much, it has this kind of, a primitive, unprofessional look, mainly because they weren't professional artists. They were just people that wanted to have something pretty, and maybe they remembered what the classical type of artwork that they saw in Europe or where they came from, and they would emulate that, and that's where we get the, what we call Pennsylvania Dutch and that sort of thing, or the what they call frock tour, which is another form of this style of painting that is considered folk art. See a lot of that in Williamsburg. Okay, before long, if you're having a painting party, you're just about to the point where you can break out the wine if you haven't already. You don't want to start with the wine too early when you're painting. Okay, so now we've got 4 stars. Darken them up just a little bit. And once again, we'll probably want to take a little bit of a break because, like I said, the frame part of it, you want it to be thoroughly dry, and it takes a little while because that's kind of a build-up when you do that, and you'll see what I mean when you start doing it. You just set them aside and let them dry, or the frame part. Actually, you can do the frame first, and by the time you get finished with your painting, your frame will be dry and ready to go. I didn't do that because I was kind of anxious to get to the painting, but you'll see. Okay, so we'll jump off once again, take a little bit of a break, and when we come back, we'll stick this frame together, and we'll glaze it up, and you will have something to hang on the wall that you'll be very pleased with. See you then. Hi, everyone. Okay, this is the close to the last part of what we need to do to get this thing fixed up. Now remember, we just got finished doing our pattern on here. I set it out in the sun for just a little bit, and it's nice and dry. So I've got all the 4 pieces that I cut for the frame, and I guess I could go over that just briefly again. The frame it can be just about anything you've got as far as scrap wood. This just happened to be some nice thin pieces that I had out there in the workshop. If you have a workshop, you probably have some scraps too. If you don't, go to the home store and find something that's some lath work or something like that. The guys there at the whether it's Lowe's or Home Depot or those kind of places, they'll be glad to help you find the right thing. And then you simply cut a miter. You can do that, with a handsaw by eye, practically, as long as the dimensions are, adequate to cover the image. Okay, now what we're going to do though, we've got this all nice and clean looking. We're going to do a little antiquing on it and a little glazing, and we're going to put some color to it. So what I've got combination of colors, which once again you can do anything you want to. This will be kind of a sort of a reddish color. Actually, it's too red. Put some more brown in it. There we go. All right. Yeah, that was pretty good. Now, but you want that to be real wet, because it's going to be a glaze. And once again, you can adjust this, but so now watch how easy this is. See that? Now, you want to model that just a little bit. There we go. That gives it just that little bit of a antique flavor. And model it just a little bit. Set these aside. And the coloration of this, you don't have to stick with what I got here. You can do it any kind of color you want. And you can go over and over these things for as long as you want to get more of an antique look. You can spatter them. You can do all kinds of things to age them. And but you sort of get the idea of where I'm going. Now the coloration here with the reds and the ochre that I used work well with these colors. If you have a different color scheme, well then use your imagination on that. You might want to go towards greens, or you might want to go towards blues, or even towards more of a black and a darkening. You know, this wavy coloration you can take this tool and make scallop designs by simply do it this way and this way and this way and this way. Or you can do straight. You can do all sorts of things. Anything that your imagination can conjure up. Okay, now. Oh, I've got these. Let's put someone down there. Okay, now the next part of it, as far as framing this stuff up, this is the easy part. And I'll show you how I do that. Okay, we've got our board made with our painting on it. That's all nice and finished. It's on cardboard. And all I'm going to do is, rather than doing a complicated framing, I'm going to take regular wood glue. I like Titebond, but you can use any of the brands, it's fine. And just run a little bit of a bead kind of around here. Actually, that's really more than you need. But, okay, and then you take the pieces, and I don't even, not even wait for them to dry. You just stick them on there. So, and I've cut them so that they're just a tad smaller than the image. That way, make sure that I've got good coverage. Are you paying attention here? Okay, now, Put that in the corner there. Put this one here. Apply a little bit of pressure. This one goes here. Make sure your stars are oriented the way you want them. Uh-oh. There you go. There you go. Now what I do at this point, I put a book or something on them to, apply some pressure, and and then I let it dry, and then I will spray on a finish. I'll show you that in just a minute. We're going to leave for just a sec now, and we'll let this dry up, and it'll only take to dry completely will only take about 20 minutes with this glue, but you'll see. So we'll come back in just a second, and I will show you the finished piece. Okay, everyone. I put just a little bit of a spray sealer on this after it completely dried, as you can see. And this is a finished piece. What do you think? It just took just a little while. Had a lot of fun doing it. You could do that with your friends, with your family, your kids, and all that. Just have a ball, and really end up with something that's really worth hanging and keeping. Or you can, as I said earlier, you can change the subject, change the size, use your imagination. But if you stick to that very simple technique that I just showed you, you'll come up with pieces of folk art just like this one that you'll be proud to hang anywhere in your home. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll do this again pretty soon with a different subject. Thanks for coming by. I've enjoyed being with you. Bye-bye.